This video series is all about minivans. Which one has 7 seats, which one has 8 seats, which one is the best fit for your family, and which one is going to be the least expensive to operate. The format of this video is a little bit different than normal for an important reason. I was finally able to schedule the 3 best-selling minivans at exactly the same time, the Sienna, the Odyssey, and the Pacifica, all in for review simultaneously. But I was not able to get the newest minivan in America at that same time, the Kia Carnival. At the time that I was able to schedule all of these vehicles, I was told that there was no way that the Carnival would arrive anytime soon, but then, rather unexpectedly, it ended up turning up the week after I had these 3 minivans. So in some of these shots, you'll notice I'm talking about just the 3 minivans that are in front of me, and then I've gone ahead and then added the appropriate shots and commentary for the Kia Carnival after the fact, so things are a little bit different. I've also decided to separate this video into 5 different sections because the video ended up being really long, and most of the folks that I talked to that are currently shopping for minivans in my friend and family circle said that they wanted really to know everything about the minivan that they were considering. So I chose to separate this into engines and cost of operation. That's coming up next. There'll be a separate video on cargo and the knickknacks, seats and interior, how they drive, and then finally a pricing and comparison section where I talk about which minivan might be the right fit for you. I think that all 4 of these minivans are excellent options in the United States, but logically some may fit you and your particular situation a little better than others. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than normal because I have 3 of the best-selling minivans in America right now, and I think until we see the new Kia Carnival in person, absolutely the 3 best forms of the 3 best-selling minivans right now. Over here on this side, we have an essentially fully loaded Honda Odyssey. If you want 8-passenger seating and a top-level trim, this is the only option available in America. Because while we do have 8-passenger variants of the Pacifica and the Sienna, you won't find 8 passengers in the absolute top-end trim for some reason. Discontinuity alert, I know I just said I wasn't able to get my hands on the Carnival. Well, here is the Carnival. There's actually a Carnival right next to it as well. Big thing to know about the Carnival is that Kia is really trying to make this the unminivan even more than the last generation of the Sedona. So with the Carnival, they've styled it more like a crossover inside and outside that has some pluses and some minuses when it comes to practicality, however. Next to the Odyssey, we have the Pacifica plug-in hybrid. This is the only plug-in hybrid minivan in America, and one of the very few 3-row plug-in hybrids available in the United States, and certainly one of the most affordable at the moment. Now, we do expect to see a new Kia Sorento plug-in hybrid, but it's not really going to be the same thing as this. This is an awful lot larger on the inside. If you want a combination of a V6 engine, 32 miles of electric range, and 30 miles per gallon after that battery is depleted, Pacifica is quite simply your only option. It's also the only option if you want a mechanical all-wheel drive system. That's because the non-hybrid Pacifica takes over where the previous generation Sienna left off. This generation Sienna no longer has a mechanical all-wheel drive system available. Instead, the Sienna is all hybrid, so every single model will have Toyota's 4-cylinder hybrid system under the hood. This is the same 4-cylinder hybrid that we find in the Highlander, tweaked a bit for the Sienna. Now, all-wheel drive is available. They put basically the same electric motor on the rear axle that we see in the Highlander hybrid, but it's not going to be quite as capable as a mechanical all-wheel drive system that you will find in the gasoline-powered Pacifica. But not the plug-in hybrid Pacifica like we're driving here. You might be wondering, why am I not in my usual shirt? Well, we do have an All Roads Lead to Minivan shirt design over at the merch store at aoamerch.com, so be sure and check that out. You can find this exact shirt right over there. The front-end design of the Carnival is definitely distinctive, and some might say controversial. We have this large grille, which is definitely distinctive and different than we've seen in Kia's lineup before. The new Kia logo right there on the hood. One thing I have noticed is that this grille looks like it's going to be a little tricky to clean because only this section of the grille is actually open and allows air to pass through. The top portion right here, about this area and a little bit of the side, that's all closed off. So there are areas there where bugs could get in, could make it a little bit tricky to clean. Obviously, these 3 minivans are not the only 3 minivans available in America. We do have the new Kia Carnival. It has been completely redesigned this year, and it's really trying to be more of a crossover-styled minivan, if you will. There's also the Chrysler Voyager. The Voyager is the really sister ship of the Pacifica here. You can think of the Voyager as the less expensive model that didn't receive all the kind of refresh tweaks that we see in this Pacifica. Then we have, I guess you could say, almost minivans. We have the Mercedes Metris, which is a rear-wheel drive minivan. It is quite different than these, and it was designed primarily for cargo carrying duty. That's also what we see in the Ford Transit Connect. You can get a passenger version of the Metris and the Transit Connect, but they're not going to be the same thing as this. Size is really going to be the key difference between the 4 mainline competitors that would be included including the Kia Carnival, and something like the Transit Connect, or the Nissan NV, or that Mercedes Metris. These are all about the same size. In fact, they are so close together, it really is astounding. They're almost exactly the same height, exactly the same width, and exactly the same length. The Carnival is 203 inches long, so it is a little bit shorter than some of those other options. But you can see they've definitely tried to style this more like, I guess, a Chevy Tahoe or another SUV. You can really see that with this strip right here. It has sort of an interesting geometric texture right there. They've tried to hide that little slide for the door, and they've made this window a little bit smaller than we see in the other vans. It's all styling and all trying to make you think that this is a bit more of an SUV. They've also increased the ground clearance. That is surprising. This has about 2.5 inches more ground clearance than we find in the Odyssey. So at 6.8 inches, if you're looking for a minivan that's higher off the ground, this is definitely going to be it. This is the tallest minivan in terms of its ground clearance available right now in the US. Even the all-wheel drive options have less ground clearance than this. Diving under the hood again, we have three very different drivetrains with definite pros and cons to each of them. Under the hood of the Odyssey, we have the only naturally aspirated non-hybrid V6. This produces 280 horsepower and 262 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to Honda's newer 10-speed automatic transmission, now in every trim of the Odyssey, so no more 9-speed under this hood. Fuel economy is the lowest in this trio at 22 miles per gallon. This is also, because of the lack of hybridization and lack of batteries, going to be the only one of these three that has a spare tire. If for whatever reason you're worried about hybrid systems or plug-in hybrid systems and you just want a good old V6 and regular automatic transmission, the Odyssey is going to be the minivan for you. Under the Sienna's hood, we find the only 4-cylinder engine in this segment currently, excluding, of course, vehicles like the Transit Connect and those smaller minivans. This is basically the same hybrid system that we find in the Highlander. It's very closely related to the hybrid systems that we find in the Lexus ES, the RAV4 Hybrid, the Camry Hybrid, and the Avalon Hybrid. This is a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine producing 245 horsepower when combined with the dual electric motor hybrid system on the other side. Fuel economy comes in the highest in this segment at 36 miles per gallon combined, 35 if you choose the all-wheel drive version, because the all-wheel drive model is a little bit heavier. Now, it's not a mechanical all-wheel drive system, it's an e-all-wheel drive system, so they put a separate electric motor on the rear axle that's essentially borrowed out of the Highlander as well. In many ways, the Pacifica's drivetrain feels like it lives between these two worlds, because like the Odyssey, we have a V6 engine under the hood. It's a 3.6-liter V6, although it's tuned for efficiency rather than power like we find in the related V6 in the regular Pacifica. This system gives us 260 horsepower total, thanks to a hybrid system that is really technically quite similar to the hybrid system that we find in the Sienna. This is a dual-motor planetary power split style system, but does have some additional features in it so that way both electric motors can be used to drive the vehicle down the road. When it's in its regular hybrid mode, it's operating essentially the same as the Sienna, obviously with some slightly altered paths and some slightly altered patents, obviously, so that way this isn't infringing on anybody's patent rights. But when it's in its electric drive mode, both electric motors can move the vehicle forward. In that way, it's actually a little bit more similar to some of the systems that we've seen from General Motors in the past. Everything put together, we have 32 miles of electric range at speeds of up to about 80 miles an hour, with a total power output in EV mode of around 110 horsepower. That may not sound like a lot, but remember, electric motors deliver an awful lot of torque, so as long as you're moderate on the throttle, you should have no problem getting up to highway speeds in electric-only mode. Under this hood, we find what Kia is calling a new 3.5-liter V6 engine, although most likely it's a heavily revised variant of their previous engine family. This now features direct injection and multi-port injection, so if you're not a fan of DI engines because of carbon buildup, fear not, this has both injection technologies on it. It produces 290 horsepower, which is class-leading, and it ties with the other leader in this segment for torque. It's mated only to an 8-speed automatic transmission, which is 2 gears behind the Odyssey, and that is the reason this is just a hair slower 0 to 60 than the Odyssey. But these are two of the quickest minivans you can get right now. Now, the one thing the Honda does not have on this is fuel economy. They're actually the same rating at 22 miles per gallon combined. Now let's dive into the potentially controversial subject of cost of ownership and cost of operation. The first thing you should know is that most of this data comes from Edmunds.com or from the fueleconomy.gov website, so you can check these numbers out for yourself if you don't believe what we're going over here. The second thing to know is that we don't have accurate data yet for the new Sienna or the new Carnival because they're too new. So when I'm talking about the Sienna's numbers, this is really based on other Toyota models with a very similar drivetrain, largely the RAV4 Hybrid, because the RAV4 Hybrid and the Highlander Hybrid are very similar, but the Highlander Hybrid doesn't have any new numbers yet because it is also too new. For the Carnival, it makes a bit more sense to use the previous generation Sedona's numbers because the bulk of the vehicle is very similar in theme. But you shouldn't take a look at the previous generation Sienna numbers because everything about the vehicle changed. It now has a very different drivetrain under the hood. Let's just roll into the numbers here. First thing to know is that the Chrysler looks like it's going to be the least expensive to keep around in terms of long-term maintenance costs. Now that's easy to explain because according to fueleconomy.gov, you should be spending most of your time in electric-only mode, and that's true for most folks out there that are willing to plug their minivan in. Now, this number will obviously change if you don't plug your minivan in. Because if you're spending most of your commute time in electric-only operation, you're not going to be changing the oil or the engine's air filter or things like that as often as you would if you never plugged it in and you simply drove it as a hybrid. So that's the big reason that the maintenance figures are a little bit less expensive for the Pacifica. As far as repair costs after warranty goes, the Pacifica leads the pack here at $966. That's a little bit above the Honda at $831. And most estimates put the Sienna actually pretty close to the Chrysler. I'm assuming this is mainly because of the newness of the drivetrain. Toyota's hybrid systems have been incredibly reliable. However, this number is based on the RAV4 all-wheel drive system, so if you get the front-wheel drive Sienna, it may be a little bit less expensive than this in expected maintenance costs. When you take a look at the Carnival's figures, some of the difference here is the maintenance interval, and that's why the cost of operation as far as oil changes, etc., is a little bit higher. And then the cost of repair is a little bit lower because of the long standard warranty that we find on the Kia. Now remember that that warranty applies only to the original purchaser, so if you transfer it to someone else, sell it on later, they don't qualify for that long powertrain warranty, and it's not a bumper-to-bumper warranty, it's just on the powertrain. Now let's dive into fuel costs, because this is an even more interesting topic. These numbers are based on 5 years of ownership, just like the maintenance costs that we just reviewed there, 75,000 miles of total driving, about $3 a gallon, which logically could be the average over the next 5 years or so. We don't really know where gasoline costs are going to go, and electricity costs of 13 cents a kilowatt hour, which is currently the national average. Now, according to the EPA, based on their estimates for the average driver in the United States, the Pacifica will spend 72% of its time in electric-only mode, assuming that it started every day in fully charged condition. That would mean that you would only spend 10 times at the gas station a year in that Pacifica and only burn 710 gallons of fuel. If you're the kind of person that's willing to trade plugging the vehicle in, it's only going to take about 30 seconds to plug it in every time you stop, then you will seriously reduce the amount of gasoline you consume and the number of stops you make. There's also a little side benefit to the Pacifica plug-in hybrid. It's the only option here that you can leave in your garage in a colder climate, say you live in Chicago or New York City, etc., and you're lucky enough to have a garage in these locations. You could start the vehicle and warm the cabin without turning on the gasoline engine as long as it's plugged in. Thanks to the high fuel economy and the plug-in hybrid nature of the Pacifica Hybrid, fuel costs are by far the lowest in the segment at $5,060 over 5 years estimated. The Sienna is next thanks to getting 36 miles per gallon. That'll get you $6,250 over 5 years of ownership. Now, there's an asterisk there because some folks have been unable to average that lofty 36 mile per gallon number in the Sienna. It really will depend on your driving style and the terrain in your area. There are areas in the country, especially if you live in a hilly area, where the Pacifica Hybrid may actually get you better fuel economy even when you're not charging it. But if you live in most of America, where it's a little bit flatter than where I live, you're probably going to get better fuel economy in the Toyota. The Sienna, however, will use considerably more gasoline at 2,083 gallons over 5 years versus 710 for the Pacifica. A little caveat here with the Pacifica I should mention is if you can charge on both sides of your daily commute, at the office and at home, then this will seriously affect your overall economy. And according to the EPA, if that situation describes you, then you are likely to spend over 90% of your time in EV mode, and that will drop your cost of operation by an additional $1,000 approximately over 5 years. And if you don't pay for that charging at the office, if you're not paying market rate for it, it will then drop that even further down. So exact cost of operation will depend on your situation, how much you pay for electricity, whether or not you can get that electricity for free, etc. Next, we have the non-hybrid models, the Odyssey and the new Carnival, $10,250 for each of these over 5 years. That's a really, really big difference. So I think it's really easy to see here that if you're simply looking at cost of operation and long-term cost of operation, say over 5 years, 6 years, 10 years even, you can save an awful lot in the Sienna or in the Pacifica. The Sienna will save you $800 a year in fuel cost versus either of these other minivans, and the Pacifica over $1,000 a year fuel savings versus the Odyssey and the Carnival. The next thing we should talk about is the tax credit on the Pacifica. Not everybody will get it, and the Pacifica is one of the plug-in hybrid vehicles that is focused on mainstream America, especially mainstream America with kids. If you have kids, you generally have tax credits and other tax basically incentives. That seems like the wrong word with kids, but other tax realities that could drive your federal tax liability down. You have to pay at least $7,500 in federal taxes in order to get the maximum tax credit on the Pacifica Hybrid. So if you aren't paying that much in federal taxes, that tax credit won't apply to you. It's not carry-overable, so you can't use some of it this year and use the rest of it next year. If you don't owe $7,500 of federal taxes or more the year that you buy a Pacifica Hybrid, that tax credit's usefulness is really just reduced to how much federal tax you owe. The last thing we should talk about is the cost of depreciation. You'll find this on an awful lot of total cost of ownership metrics, where they're talking about buying a vehicle, keeping it for 5 years, 75,000 miles, etc., and then selling it on. What kind of cost can you recoup from that transaction? When you take a look at these numbers, it looks like the Odyssey is going to be one of the better options in this segment. According to them, the Odyssey EXL for $40,556, after 5 years, you should expect it to be worth $22,849, about 56%. A Chrysler Pacifica Hybrid, they're saying, will list for $40,647. That's approximately the same price as that Honda Odyssey there, and it will supposedly be worth $19,682 after 5 years, or 48%. That seems like a really big difference. But there's a big caveat here, and that is when you take a look at these depreciation numbers, they're always going off MSRP. And the reality is you're not going to pay MSRP for the Pacifica. Right now, there's $3,500 of national cash on the hood. There's always a lot of cash on the hood with the Chrysler. And that drives down these resale value calculations. If, for instance, you took into factor that $3,500 less that you would have paid for your Pacifica, and then selling it for the same value that Edmunds is saying that it would be worth, because they are going off used car values, so that part is accurate, you'd end up at 53%. Still lower than the Honda, but not as low as that might seem. Making it a little bit trickier for the Pacifica Hybrid is the fact that you could get up to $7,500 of federal tax credits on it. If you qualified for the full $7,500 in federal tax credits, the long-term cost of ownership is definitely going to be significantly less in the Pacifica than any other minivan in that segment. Because not only are you going to be spending less on fuel, it also has a relatively low cost of maintenance over that 5-year period, thanks to just not running the engine quite as much. And then the resale value is really not that much below what we see in the Honda and the Toyota. But as always, there are a ton of factors going on when it comes to pricing, so for the complete pricing and detailed section, be sure and stay tuned for the last episode in this minivan series. One last thing to note about that $7,500 federal tax credit is that, of course, you have to buy the vehicle for that. If you lease it, the tax credit does not apply. The leasing company gets the credit. You have to actually buy the minivan, and you pay sales tax on the full amount. You then theoretically get a $7,500 federal tax credit. So there is a little bit of math that you're going to have to do if you want to know the final number for your situation. You're going to get $7,500 off your federal tax bill. You're going to have to pay the sales tax. If you pay sales tax in the state that you live in on the full price of the car, you then get that credit back, assuming you've overpaid the IRS for that amount. Or if you live in a state like California, there can be an additional state incentive that is oftentimes applied at the time of purchase. That'll just come right off the top of your bill. Thanks for checking out this video. Be sure and sound off about the format of this minivan series, and of course, check out the other episodes where I take a deep dive into the interior, toss a bunch of knickknacks in the vehicle, test out the cargo area, take them all out on the road, and then discuss which is the best minivan of these 4 in the United States right now. I'll see all of you later.